Tax reform sounds easy until you start looking at the details, and then it gets difficult, just like health reform. It is quite different, I agree with you, than health reform, where at least the diagnosis of the problem is commonly shared, right? So the US corporate tax is the highest among the OECD partners. We have a tax system that supposedly taxes worldwide income, but allows for a ton of income not being taxed or being taxed at much lower rates because there are loopholes, because of gimmicks. And so I think everybody agrees that it's a problem. And then in particular, we also worry that our tax system is pushing US companies to move headquarters overseas to become foreign companies. So we agree on the problem. And the Obama administration had a corporate tax proposal. So that's different than health reform, where we don't even agree on the basic facts on the ground. But then when you try to think about where do you go from here, it becomes very difficult. And I think three basic reasons. So if you think about tax reform, what people often mean about tax reform is not just a tax cut, but really, as you say, a sort of essential change in how we tax. So the House Republicans have a proposal that I would call real tax reform, where you're really, really changing the way corporate and business income is taxed, where it's going to depend on where the products are sold rather than where they're produced. So it's very, very different. If you want to have a tax reform that isn't just a tax cut, but that is revenue neutral, right? That says we're going to lower taxes in some areas, we're going to have to raise them in other. We're going to get rid of loopholes. We're going to get rid of the gimmicks. Then what happens is you split the business community, right? There are winners and there are losers. And once you've done that, it makes it very, very difficult to pass, right? So so take an example. In the House Republican tax reform plan, they have this border adjusted tax, this BAT you've probably heard about, right? And what that appears to do, economists would argue that it doesn't, but what that appears to do is to tax importers and subsidize exporters. So a retailer like Walmart that imports most of its stuff is firmly against it. So and it will also, not only are they against it in terms of saying this is bad for our business, but they say it's going to raise prices on consumers, right? So a congressman and a lot of their voters shop at Walmart is going to have a hard time voting for that. So because there are winners and losers, it just makes it very, very difficult for everybody to get on board, right? So that makes it hard. So, but it's not as hard if you say, you know what, we don't have to be revenue neutral. We can make some of these reforms and, let it pass through and increase the deficit. Well, that becomes difficult for other reasons. So certainly at this point in time, with the debt already very high, there are people in the Republican Congress who would not easily vote for something that increased deficits. Procedurally, it's difficult as well because in the Senate, if something increases deficits beyond the 10-year window, you have to have 60 votes unless they change those rules, which would mean that you couldn't do it just with Republicans, so that becomes difficult. And I think on top of that, at this point in the business cycle, it's a lot harder to argue that we need to cut taxes in order to spur the economy, right? So we're kind of at full employment, the Fed is raising interest rates, you kind of lose that argument. So it's easier to get those kinds of tax cuts when everybody says, well, we need to do something, right? And then I think the third reason that it's hard, as we said, both Republicans and Democrats want to do something, but cutting business taxes, corporate taxes, individual business taxes, tends to be distributionally tilted towards the wealthy. Right? So the only way the Democrats would sign on is if you had something that really had a lot of benefits, a lot of, it doesn't have to be taxes, but it could be taxes or ACA subsidies or for the people in the middle and lower income classes. It's not clear to me that the Republicans would give enough to make the Democrats want to do that, especially because we've got 2018 on the horizon and people said, well, what if we just wait, maybe, this will be a do-nothing Congress and we could take over the House. So I think for those reasons, it just makes it incredibly difficult.